Right, this is going to be tricky because I've got three things to do in two hands. So, just apologies in advance. I will be reading a fair bit. It's still like an address more than extemporaneous, mainly because there's so much you can say about a hotel that's 159 years old, if you include its predecessor. And I don't want to stray off topic too much. I also think if you can finish a bit early and have some questions, it's better than going right to the bell. So this month, the Prince Consort Hotel in Wickham Street, Fortitude Valley, celebrates its 134th birthday. So when you add the predecessor to that, built on the same site in 1863, its history actually stretches back 159 years. So today I want to talk about the history of the hotel against the background of the fluctuating fortunes of Fortitude Valley, from its settlement and early growth through to its heyday, gradual decline and recent revival. It is in essence a story of survival. Throughout its long history, the hotel has outlasted fierce competition, economic depressions, changing consumer tastes, suspected arson, encroaching gentrification and various unsympathetic redevelopment proposals. But hopefully what you hear today will give you some insights into the possible secrets behind its longevity. Just to start with, there's a good book J.M. Freeman wrote a few years ago, 1966, so quite a few years ago, and it's got a good quote about pubs, and I think it talks about how often the pubs are the centre of any community. And I'd add to that and basically say that I've found, and I don't think it's any brainwave to realise it, but in a community like Fortitude Valley, the pubs were often the first built and they're the last standing, probably along with churches. So really, when you look at the history of a pub or a church in any community around Australia, you can really trace the ebb and flow of a community. So just bear that in mind, I guess, while I'm talking today. Brisbane, of course, was originally founded as a penal settlement called Moreton Bay. It was a colony of New South Wales. And for the first few years of White's settlement, we know the local topography and the lack of permanent river crossings meant that Brisbane grew up in basically three distinct areas. There was North Brisbane, South Brisbane, Kangaroo Point. Closer settlement to the north of the city was initially slow and confined to Spring Hill and New Farm. And there were problems navigating the steep terrain along what later became Ann Street. If you're familiar with that huge wall next to All Hallows, for example, that used to be the height of the hill. So, quite an obstacle. So because of that, Wickham Street became the preferred track linking the township to Breakfast Creek and the convict outstation at Eagle Farm. Plans from the 1840s show Wickham Street meandering in a slightly circular direction from the western corner of Boundary Street through two hilly ridges and across low-lying areas and a creek. Now, 3 shiploads of free emigrants arrived from England during 1849, boosting the colony's population by about 25% virtually overnight. And some settled in present-day Bowen Hills, but most settled in a nearby area called Bells Valley. During the 1850s, this district became better known as Fortitude Valley, named, of course, for Fortitude, one of the 3 emigrant ships. Within 5 years, the valley had about 100 houses built of stone, brick or timber. Now, this sketch was done by Sylvester Diggins in 1856. As far as I'm aware, it shows Wickham Street around that time, and it basically shows very sparsely inhabited settlement cleared of much of its original scrub. But it didn't stay that way for long because, being close to the city, of course, speculators moved in, subdivided the land, and then more houses were built. So by 1861, the valley's population had grown to about 1,300 people. Now, the proprietor of the first Prince Consort Hotel was Maximilian Myers, M-E-Y-E-R-S. He was a Queen Street auctioneer and a money broker. And in April 1863, he applied to the authorities to licence an existing wooden building on the corner of Wickham and Brunswick, where the bottle shop is now. It was known as the Kensington Hotel. Now, there had recently been passed a new Publicans Act which specified licensees had to provide at least 2 moderately sized sitting rooms and 2 sleeping rooms for public accommodation. Stables and feed also had to be provided for guests' horses. Now, Myers' application to enlarge the premises was deferred because there wasn't enough room in the plans at that stage for his guests, so he revised his application in mid-1863, and this is who he named it after. He named his new hotel the Prince Consort after Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, spouse of Queen Victoria, who died about 18 months earlier. Now, I just noticed today, it was Albert's birthday yesterday. So, he would have been 220, 204, 203. My maths is right, if he was still with us. Sadly not. Ads for the local hotel began appearing in newspapers from late July, offering excellent wines and spirits and well-aired beds. Myers held a grand opening ball at the hotel in September to officially celebrate its opening. Unfortunately, it seems that he'd overcapitalised and his estate was seized in November 1863. And it's from that notice in the paper that we get an idea of the standard he'd established at his hotel in that short time. Among the furniture and fittings included a dining table that seated 20 people, Spanish mahogany chairs, leather couches, four-poster beds, damask table linen and elegant dinner services. Now, the sale of the hotel's effects was managed by someone whose name will be familiar to a lot of you, I think, John Daniel Heel. He was a prominent Valley citizen, stonemason, contractor, alderman and future Lord Mayor when he took over its operations. And he ran the hotel from 1864 until 1880, when he leased it out to a bloke called Henry Banks for 2 years and then to a guy called Fred Copeland. That's a very early ad, probably the earliest ad I came across for the original Prince Consort from 1864. That was in a directory, the Pew's Almanac. Now, Hill's involvement no doubt afforded the hotel patronage and prestige. Several Masonic lodges and friendly societies met regularly at the hotel during the 1860s and 70s. So, for example, the Masons, the Oddfellows and the Ancient Order of Foresters all met at the hotel. Publicans and candidates used the hotel to rally their supporters, and Heel hosted fellow publicans for the quarterly meetings of the Licensed Victuallers Association. So that was the union, if you like, of hotel owners. And the hotel was also a place for celebrations. In June 1866, contractors held a banquet to celebrate the completion of the walls of the new Parliament House in George Street. Brisbane population grew by almost 10,000 during the 1860s to more than 15,000 by 1871 and a further 8,000 during the next decade. And the Valley's share of this population almost quadrupled during the same period from, I said, 1,300 roughly in 1861 to over 5,000 in 1881. And the 1880s were a real boom time for Brisbane and the local economy. There was good money coming from gold and wool, and the British banks were pouring money in. So you probably noticed there's a lot of buildings around town. The ones that we've still got, you often see a common date for the around 1880, 1888, 1889, that sort of thing. That's when a lot of the more substantial buildings were going up. In fact, and hotels were part of that boom. In fact, someone once, a southern visitor to Queensland, remarked in 1888 that the difficulty in choosing a hotel arises more from an embarrassed to riches, the number of establishments being larger probably in proportion to the population than in Sydney and Melbourne. For Brisbane in the summer is indeed a thirsty place. It's a nice line. So a number of new or rebuilt hotels were constructed in the Valley from the mid-80s, including the Oriental, which was later renamed the Wickham, the Royal George, the Empire, the Jubilee and the Shamrock. They were all built or modified around that time. By 1891, the Valley's population had reached 7,000 and the area was fast becoming a commercial hub to rival Brisbane City. Next slide. So the second Prince Consort was built in the same spot as the first, and the owner was John Heel, who'd maintained his lease for 15 years before purchasing the hotel and some neighbouring subdivisions. He needed extra land. So the new hotel was designed by this bloke, Richard Gailey. He was an Irish-born architect, and he's one of 11 architects practising in Brisbane at that time. Gailey called for tenders in mid-1887, and a new farm-based contractor, William Ferguson, was chosen to build the new hotel at a cost of £9,400. Now, construction took 12 months. Unfortunately, Ferguson died during the completion and his estate had to organise someone else to finish the job. And so what did the new pub look like? Well, it looked like that. So a detailed description of the new hotel's features, together with the sketch you can see, was published in August 1888 in the local Figaro and Punch, I think was the name of the newspaper. The hotel occupied 119-foot frontage on Wickham Street, 36 metres, included space for several shops. Its western depth was 99 feet and it stood 46 feet high. Inside, the hotel boasted one of the largest bars in Brisbane, 3 parlours, a large dining room, billiard room, cellar, 6 bathrooms and 28 bedrooms. And a huge club room ran the whole length of the first floor. The club room was where the Masons and others used to gather and have their dinners and that sort of thing. So Hill marketed his hotel to interstate and intrastate travellers involved in Queensland's booming economy. And this is an example of an ad. It was actually published in a guide to gold prospecting at Mount Morgan, interestingly. So the advert talks about promises patrons close access to the railway station wharves and splendid accommodation at moderate prices. But Hill also knew the commercial value of attracting and retaining a local clientele. So drinking and socialising at hotels back then was predominantly a working class and working man's recreation, because those from the middle and upper classes tended to meet in their own clubs or at home. So larger hotels also played an important role as meeting places for men's social clubs. As with the first Prince Consort, Masonic lodges and friendly societies continued to meet regularly. And patrons are lured by sporting competitions. I've already mentioned billiards. If you wanted to have a billiard table in your pub, you had to apply for a separate licence. It's because so many people played it and they gambled on the outcomes of it. So you actually had to pay a certain amount and be cleared and qualified as a reputable person to hold a licence to own a billiard table in a hotel. By 1892, the Prince Consort was one of 34 Brisbane hotels boasting billiard tables. So it was a big sport. Perkins and Company Brewery saw an opportunity to expand their influence over the hotels. They purchased the Prince Consort's lease in 1895. And another name, Pro, which is a familiar name around here, Alderman and future Mayor Thomas Pro, P-R-O-E, successfully tendered for the hotel's licence. So local businesses were boosted by the extension of the railway line from the city through the valley in 1891 and the opening of our electric tramway system in 1897. That tram is a horse-drawn tram from a bit earlier, from probably around about 1885. So a number of industries were putting their roots down in the valley, including workshops, foundries, furniture makers, clothing manufacturers. Several disastrous floods in South Brisbane in 1893 actually turned out to be a boon for the valley, because a number of businesses based around Stanley Street got sick of the floods and they moved to the valley because we were less flood affected. The 1890s and early 1900s, of course, saw the arrival in the valley of three large department stores, T.C. Byrne, McWhirter's and Overell's, who between them would dominate the local retail scene for the next 50 years. So what you've got is a combination of better transport links and local employment opportunities, encouraging more people to move to the valley. By 1901, the valley was indisputably Brisbane's second most important retail district, serving surrounding areas as well as the people who lived around here. It was, as one historian has noted, well on the way to becoming the emporium of the metropolis. The first proprietor during the early years of the 20th century was Martin Moran, and he was followed by Dennis O'Connor. I'll put it up now because I think it's a lovely slide, this one. That's a postcard which Dennis put out in about Dennis O'Connor, yes, put out in 1912. So he basically rearranged the public bars. There was a story in 1907 and said there was a new and commodious dining room. He hoped to establish a reputation for the hotel amongst lovers of well-cooked and well-served luncheons. But he went further than that. He also modernised the accommodation and he updated the bathrooms as well with enamel baths. And he also knew how to entertain the top end of town. And his hotel was often mentioned in the society papers. In one way, his own improvements made him a victim of his own success, because in 1908, you'd be interested in this, Vicky, in 1908 he asked the council for a reduction in his cleaning charges because so many members of the general public were coming in and using the toilets in his hotel. Well, his request was denied. So, surprise, surprise. But I think that's a nice little story, you know. Oh, complain to the council, can you reduce my cleaning charges because the public keep coming and using my toilets. When it came to accommodation, O'Connor understood his hotel could never match the size and grandeur of the city's best hotels, but it could offer close access to the railway line and the wharves and local manufacturers. And in one ad, he declared that he could provide basically accommodation for 6 shillings a day, which other hotels would charge you 10 shillings for. So that's the advantage that they tried to trade off, I guess. Now, John Hill had died in 1908, and once his estate was settled, O'Connor took the opportunity to purchase the hotel in 1911, so just before this postcard, for a price estimated at between £30,000 and £35,000, so handy sum. He continued with his modernisation program, and prior to Christmas in 1911, he installed a new mechanism for storing, cooling and pumping draft beer via insulated copper cylinders. In late 1917, he sold the lease to another fellow, Percy Fowles. He was followed by Dick Cavell. Cavell is a well-known hotel name in Queensland, of course. They came from the Gold Coast. They ran the Brecky Creek for a number of years and other pubs as well. Now, after Dick Cavell, the licence was held by John Joseph Murphy. But Murphy's untimely death in 1927 led to one of the Prince's most prosperous eras under his widow, Ida. I wish I could show you a photo or a picture of Ida Murphy, but I've been unable to find one. I can't find any surviving family. She actually outlived several of her kids, and I can't find a photo of her. But she was, by all accounts, quite a ferocious and very good manager of the pub. Anyone expecting that a female licensee would have the moderating influence on their patrons' behaviour, however, might be surprised to learn the hotel experienced a large amount of crime and mishaps during the 1920s. Thefts, fraud, assaults, stabbings, and a disturbing number of serious falls down stairways were all reported in lurid detail by the Brisbane press, often in the Truth newspaper. The Valley and the hotel were not always safe places. I've collected some examples of those, but I'm not given time. I'm not going to read them out to you, but there's some real doozies of accidents and robberies and all sorts of stuff that happened. Even bar staff being attacked by people. Anyway, next slide. So moving on. The Valley's industrial and residential growth reached a peak during the 1920s, but Queensland was swept up in the worldwide depression, which began with the Wall Street crash of 1929. Some things were still going on. Well, for example, that's a photo of tram tracks being relaid in Wickham Street outside the hotel, which I think is a nice photo. Counterbalance that with this photo from 1933, which shows a group of men, women and children lining up to receive free food parcels from McWhirter staff on Christmas Day 1933. The staff handed out 4,500 food parcels on that day. So, puts it in context, doesn't it? Of what the Depression meant for so many working families. And although it would take a world war to finally end the Depression, there were signs by the mid-30s that recovery was underway. A number of the Valley's hotels and department stores were refurbished as Brisbane began to emerge from the Depression. McWhirter's opened its new Art Deco themed store, of course, on the corner of Wickham and Brunswick Streets, 1932. The Waterloo Hotel in Ann Street, which was actually one of the earliest pubs in the Valley, was totally modernised to an Art Deco look. And 1935 saw the start of the Prince Consort's biggest renovation in almost 50 years. Refurbishments were designed by architect John Patrick Donoghue. He was a very successful local architect who did a lot of commissions, not just for hotels, but also for the state government. He built a number of hospitals, or designed a number of hospitals around Queensland. He also did a lot of work for the Catholic Church. So that's what the hotel looked like post the renovation. And the main thing, I guess, to point out is you can see that we now have a cantilevered awning stretching all the way along the front. The old style wrought iron pillars were really going out of fashion, particularly the number of trucks that would hit them, for example. And as you can see, there's a Bulimba Brewery truck parked next to it. The owners of the buildings just got sick of it, and that actually happened in a lot of places. The Royal George did the same thing. They just ended up taking away the posts, the veranda posts, and putting a cantilevered veranda on instead. So the other modifications, the ground floor facade was remodelled using tiles, lead-light windows and glass swing doors. And inside, the layout and decor of the bars were updated. The total costs were £4,000. Sounds reasonable. In a shopping guide to the Valley published the next year, the Truth's correspondent waxed lyrical about the improvements. To think of the Valley without the Prince Consort Hotel right in the centre of the block would be like thinking of a ship without a sea. There are few hotels in the city which can come up to it for comfort, and the service is par excellence. That was probably an advertorial, I suggest. I think the hotel might have paid to have that written. An economically turbulent decade ended with the opening of the Story Bridge in July 1940, which finally provided a permanent direct link from the Valley to the eastern side of the city. And then we know what comes next, don't we? War and recovery. Celebrations for the opening of the long-awaited Story Bridge were muted because World War II had broken out 10 months earlier. And of course, for the first 2 years of the war, Australia's focus was on our troops in the Middle East and North Africa, and then of course came Pearl Harbor, Darwin, fall of Singapore and that sort of stuff in February 1942. It had a very deep psychological impact on the Brisbane population. it suddenly seemed like we were going to get invaded by Japan at almost literally, any moment. So Brisbane was put on immediate alert. There was an air raid shelter built at the back of the Prince Consort in 1942. It was one of more than 200 that were built across Brisbane during the war to combat the perceived threat of Japanese air attack. And that's a photo from around the time that General Douglas MacArthur arrived in Brisbane in 1942. Suddenly we played host to thousands of Allied troops. At its peak, more than 75,000 US troops were stationed in southeast Queensland. And the valley's proximity to wharves and industrial facilities meant a number of local factories and warehouses were leased or requisitioned for war-related purposes, including the Fish Steam Laundry on Ann Street and the Benedict Stone Factory in Light Street. And the Story Bridge, which actually hadn't received as much traffic as they'd hoped when it opened because of the toll, was suddenly put to good use by the US troops. And there were American anti-aircraft batteries in Bowen Hills. There was, of course, the US submarine base in Tenerife, and many troops were based at camps around the valley. And Albion Park was the only racetrack that kept trading, kept holding race meetings during the war, making it very popular with soldiers and civilians alike. So I think there's probably little doubt that the Prince Consort did pretty well during this time, welcoming many thirsty Allied servicemen, military leave permitting. Prince Consort publican during the immediate post-war period was this fellow. Who follows rugby league? Who knows about Tom Gorman? I didn't, because I don't. But Tom Gorman was a very good rugby league player, came originally from North Queensland, moved to Toowoomba, started playing union, then took up league, and ended up playing for Queensland. And then he was the first Queenslander to captain Australia in an international rugby league. He's won lots of awards. Anyway, he was a publican, and he was very gregarious and popular host. It's not the first hotel to have caught on to the idea of having a retired sports star, behind the bar, because they're very popular people. He often featured in press reports, whether hosting visiting sporting teams or being asked to provide recollections from his league playing days. So the Valley continued to be a key retail and commercial hub during the 1950s, and the suburb remained a solid alternative to Brisbane City. And the presence of McWhirters and TC Byrne and Overalls and Coles and Woolworths continued to draw shoppers into this area. I read this during my research. I was surprised, but I can understand it. Apparently, during this period, the Valley was Australia's largest retail precinct outside of CBD. So there you go. But there was a population drift to the outer suburbs by families and newlyweds. Their places were taken in some part, at least, by the post-war influx of Italian immigrants to New Farm in the Valley. But there are other changes too. Alcohol legislation was slowly being relaxed to reflect the changing demands of drinkers and diners, and the modifications to the Prince Consort at this time were no doubt planned with these new relaxed measures. So, for example, they brought in the first point-of-sale bottle departments, which I think basically became drive-thrus. In 1961, amendments to hotel legislation allowed women to buy and consume alcohol in a lounge bar, provided the lounge was prominently labelled and was located in or next to a lounge or sitting room. I find it fascinating that women were not allowed to drink in public bars until 1970, but people like Ida Murphy could run a pub in the 1930s. Anyway, odd. Decline. The next section's headed decline. Brisbane's inner suburbs were changing, growing suburbanisation, increasing car ownership and the advent of large suburban shopping centres all contributed to the decline of the Valley as a major shopping hub during the 60s and 70s. And this photo was probably taken, I'm not sure exactly sure when, but obviously this is at the heyday, with people, see Santa up the top there. A lot of you would have seen that picture. By the mid-70s, McWhirters, TC Byrne and Overalls had all been taken over by the southern-based firms of Myer, David Jones and Waltons. A number of local industries were shifting out to the middle and outer suburbs, and the population drift to these areas was becoming a flood. And social habits were changing too. People had televisions, and they were competing for the attention of hotel patrons, just as radios and movie theatres had decades earlier. It's said that people were not necessarily drinking less, it's just they were more likely to be drinking at home. And as late as 1975, a historian, John McClurg, described Wickham Street as one of the central commercial streets of Brisbane, but it was clear that the Valley was losing its lustre as a shopping destination. I also think, I don't think it's just my theory, but the council decision to turn Wickham and Ann streets into one-way streets, for example, may well have improved traffic flow and sped up traffic, but it also alienated pedestrians and it reinforced a growing sense the valley was no longer a destination in its own right. It was really a thoroughfare between points A and B. So it's pretty clear that the Prince Consort would have suffered during this decline. So in the absence of legislated heritage protection, many of Brisbane's older hotels, theatres and other entertainments were demolished during the 70s and 80s. Oh, I meant to show you that slide before, sorry. So there's a tram in 67 going past the Wickham. Someone will be able to tell me, is it actually turning into Wickham, Brunswick Street, or is it turning into Wickham? Which end of the tram is which? Which way? Going into Brunswick? Okay, thank you. That's why I deliberately was vague in the caption. Because I kept second guessing myself. Which way is this tram going? But anyway, so there you go. So that was 2 years before the last, is that right? I think it was 2 years before the last tram ran. So, you know, sad time. So this is what was happening around the rest of Brisbane. The Bellevue Hotel, the Cloudland Ballroom, there were lots and lots of others. However, a combination of good geography, good luck, good management meant some of the valley's older hotels managed to survive the Wreckers' Ball, although some of them, like the Royal George, like the Osborne, like the Shamrock, were remodelled almost beyond recognition. The Prince Consort was entered into the Register of the National Estate in 1986, but that actually didn't have any enforceable protections. More significant and enforceable action came with the election of the Goss Labor government in December 89 and the passing of Queensland's first Heritage Act, which was 30 years ago this month. Okay, so before August 1992, there was basically nothing to stop you if you wanted to knock something over, as we've seen. Now, the Prince Consort was added to the accompanying Queensland Heritage Register the same year. In fact, this October, 2 months' time, it's the 30th anniversary of that listing of the hotel. The hotel's listing cited its historic, cultural and aesthetic significance in association with the work of architect Richard Gailey. Between these two heritage listings, however, came an event which only made them both redundant. In the early hours of 21st of March 1987, there was a big gas explosion in the Cathay restaurant next to the Prince Consort. The front doors were blown out of the hotel, awnings buckled, glass was scattered. The damage was somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million. The hotel was owned at the time by Jack Hing, a Valley businessman adversely mentioned in the Fitzgerald inquiry into police corruption, and arson was strongly suspected. You might remember cartoons like this. The inquiry, which ran from 87 to 89, exposed many of the Valley's shady nighttime operations, particularly organised prostitution and illegal gaming. Younger patrons, like me back then, were discovering the Valley's bars, music venues and cheap restaurants, but for many living in the suburbs, the Fitzgerald revelations merely confirmed their view that the Valley was a place to be avoided at all costs. How are we going? 5 minutes? 5? Okay. Okay, I was going to show you that one? Yeah. Actually, I'll do the next one. There we go. That's from 1990. So, but things were looking up. In the early 90s, the BCC embarked on a pedestrianisation bandwagon that was sweeping Australia by closing Brunswick Street between Ann and Wickham and to construct the Brunswick Street Mall, and it was further renovated in 1995, 2014. Then the neighbouring Chinatown Mall in Duncan Street opened in 87. Urban renewal was the phrase on planners' lips, was given added impetus with the introduction of the City of Brisbane Urban Renewal Program in 1991. The program was designed to revitalise the city's inner northeastern suburbs by repurposing existing buildings and attract new residents and businesses. So we saw things like the apartments put into the old McWhirters building and the Sun building, weekend markets, arts festivals, burgeoning local music scene, that sort of stuff. So just soon after this photo was taken, the Prince Consort was sold for $1.1 million, sounds like a bargain now, in September 1992. And it's changed several times again during the 1990s. Sometimes I think it was just people looking to get rich and do a flip. Others, like these guys, this is what they wanted to do in 1997, a proposal to refurbish the Prince Consort, construct a 180-room, 11-storey, 3-star Holiday Inn behind it. Proposal was approved by the Heritage Council, interestingly, but it didn't proceed. Now, in 2000, there was an application to redevelop the hotel as the English-themed pub named the Elephant and Wheelbarrow, and I think a lot of you here might associate that name with the Prince Consort more than the Consort, the elephant or the elephant wheelbarrow. That plan was approved. In 2003, Valley Pubs applied to build again an 80-room, 6-storey residential hotel. It didn't happen. It was sold again in 2004 for about $6 million. And around about 2005, we started to see the things like the special entertainment precinct in the Valley, which basically to protect live music venues and provide greater certainty for new and prospective residents, because people were buying up, I'm sure you'll be able to back this up, people were buying up in the Valley and moving in and then complaining about the noise, which, you know, do a bit of homework, folks. In 2013, John Singleton's Australian Pub Fund acquired the Elephant Wheelbarrow for an estimated $27 million and undertook refurbishments to the bars, outdoor beer garden and gaming room. By this stage, the Valley's population, which had dipped to about 3,500 in 2001, had rebounded to about 7,000 in 2016. So in February of 2020, the Prince Consort was built by Tilly and Wills Hotel Group. They were a Sydney-based firm. And they embarked on a massive internal remodelling. And they, to their credit, took the hotel back to its original name of the Prince Consort. Now, today's not the day. I can talk about it another time. I won't go into all the renovations that have happened. I've been through and done tours with the architect and so on. If you went in there now, don't expect a pristine historical environment, because frankly, it's a working pub, and it has been so for a number of years. There are aspects of the history, and you can still see it there if you squint a bit. For example, there's exposed steel beams on the first floor. If you go down into the basement, there are brick sections which actually show you where the original floor plan was and where the rooms would have been above them. There's chimneys throughout as well. There's large part of the original staircase is still there, and around it, around the moulding, which is decaying, but they've preserved it, you can see horsehair that was used in the plaster. So, you know, in the gaming area, I don't go to the gaming area, but the guy said, I'll come and look in here, you look up and you can see some panelled sheet pressed metal ceiling in the gaming area. So there are bits and pieces of the pub that are still there from when it was built. But frankly, it's not, as I said, a pristine environment, and you know, I don't think you'd expect it to be. It's a working hotel. I think the lesson that I took out of that is that, okay, John Heel, Ida Murphy and Tom Gorman may not recognise the music or what's happening in there these days on the big screen, but I think they still recognise that people are keen just to get together and have a good time, just as they did back in their day, and I think that's the legacy of the hotel. Thanks for your time. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions or comments? I want to know, are there still accommodation rooms?
Yeah, it's funny. It's a big barn of a place. So you probably gathered from those dimensions I read out, and it's still that size. It's a really big place. So I think what the new owners have done is quite clever. They've divided it up into different sections for different audiences. So there's a place you can go and hire out for a venue for a wedding. There's a thing called the Richie York Suites, where they've taken 21 original rooms, which were then later backpacker rooms, and they've turned them into artist offices, which can be leased out. So there's 21 artists or related entrepreneurs using one of the floors of that hotel. Downstairs is a place called 400 Rabbits, which is some Mexican-themed cantina. In the basement is something called Greases, which has karaoke. Out the back, there's still the beer garden where they run trivia. There's different places they show UFC fighting on big screens. I mean, they've thought about lots of different audiences and catered to them. But no, you can't stay there anymore.
Any other questions? Comments?
Yeah.
Memories?
Thank you so much. That was so interesting. I'm wondering if there's a general policy about pub names. Because as you started the talk, I was thinking about the Royal George.
Yes.
And now it's, you know, the RG. And that's kind of things goes on.
Yeah.
And is there any kind of attempt to sort of keep that?
There's certainly nothing enforceable. And I think, is that an English accent I detect?
Yes.
Okay.
So it's a bit of a thing in England.
Exactly, and England's got hundreds and hundreds more years history, and I imagine if you tried to, you had the old Nag's Head or something and someone decided to change the name, they'd be picketing, they hang on to names, whereas we haven't. In the history I've read of different pubs, we change pubs' names fairly regularly, and particularly with new pubs or newer owners, they decide to change the name because they've decided that it's all part of market research and rebranding and all that stuff. I know, for example, a few hotels, and there's one in North Hobart I know, which had a royal name, so they called it the Republic to sort of say, we're not a royal pub anymore. Whereas I think it's really nice that the current owners have actually decided to go back, because if you didn't know and you thought it was the Elephant and Wheelbarrow or whatever, you have to look up the top to actually see it on the parapet. Oh yeah, that's right, this was originally the Prince Consort, and now it is again. So I'm old-fashioned about that, but there's nothing to stop new owners mucking around with names just as often as they muck around with the menus, I guess.
You didn't say anything about the ghost.
Yeah, I don't know. I've heard different accounts of the ghost. What have you heard about the ghost?
There's a lot in our archives on the ghost.
Oh, the ghost of the Prince Consort?
Yes.
Oh, I must come and look.
That's why I wondered.
Okay. Oh. Every hotel needs a ghost. Just like every theatre needs a ghost. I was at the Princess this morning for... Has anyone been to Brisbane Open House this weekend? You know it's on right now. Yeah. I was helping out at the Princess Theatre this morning. They have a ghost. Jerry?
If there are lots of sub-businesses there now, were there sort of sub-businesses there in the past?
Yeah, in fact, nowadays, of course, you just walk straight into the pub off the street. It's a good question, Jared. I happen to have a list I did for the owners. I don't think I mentioned, I should declare an interest here. I was paid to write the history of this pub last year. Did I mention that? Anyway, I was. What you've heard today is a very, very cut-down version of that report. But in terms of tenancies, yes, when it was built, in 1889, Mr. George Stevens operated an oyster saloon adjacent to the hotel. Oyster saloons were really big back then. Then in the 26 to 33, the Prince Consort Cafe, also known as the Prince Consort Oyster Saloon, was next door. And the proprietors were a Greek family. And I've seen a lovely photo of the interior. It looked really nice. In 1931, there was a hairdresser and a news agency. In 1936, there were retail spaces renovated as part of that renovation I mentioned. Tenants included a milk bar, a shoe store, a bottle shop and a news agency. There were dentists operating above the wine shop from 1936 to 1951. That wartime photo I showed earlier from 42 shows a newsagent and a tobacconist and a bottle shop with a watchmaker and jewellers next door. And of course, in one of those photos, I think it was where the tram was turning the corner, whichever way it was going, it showed the Elizabeth Mayfair Beauty Salon. I don't know if any of you ever went there. That was the tenancy closest to the Brunswick Street. And of course, I mentioned the Cathay Pacific and the fate of the Cathay Pacific in that alleged arson in 1987. Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Robert.
Okay.
Go ahead. We're glad that you got paid to produce so much history and that you were here to tell us about it. And Robert, could I give you you may have a copy of this already.
I've got the other one.
Oh.
So, yeah, good to have. Thank you. Thank you.